The tallest bot hesitated as the door loomed in front of him. Had he ever been in Mirage's room before? He'd never wanted to, that was for sure. Xavi had left Shura in his room so that the poor artist could rest. She'd been out cold the instant he laid her down on the cool sheets of the dark room. Normally, he would have stayed with her, but there was a strange nagging feeling in the back of his circuits. Mirage had gotten them out of a pretty serious situation. The least he could do was check on the other, right? Why was the door so intimidating? Xavi didn't like Mirage, or at least that was what he kept telling himself. The more he looked at it, the more he felt a little bit silly. The bot had never stopped to consider how the puppet master felt about their situation here at Star Palace. Here Xavi was, fighting for attention, but all Mirage seemed to want was to be left alone. Perhaps it was time they changed their perspectives on each other. The bot pulled up his hand to knock on the door, only to stop inches away from the wood as a muffled sound from inside caught his attention. For a moment, he thought it was simply Mirage talking to Eerie. However, as he pressed his face to the door to try and hear better, it sounded like many voices speaking at once. Who in the world was there? Mirage never let anyone else into their room if they could help it.
You can't do anything right, can you?
Calen laughed out. You tried to save everyone, but you just wound up getting chewed out, said Harlequin.
That's just so sad.
Piero whimpered.
Quiet, all of you,
Eerie demanded. She could see Mirage's body shaking as they tried to process everything that had happened. In the heat of the moment, they'd been able to think on their feet. Now that it was all over and done with, they were left with the swirling thoughts in their mind threatening to spill over. In fact, they already were. Their puppets were stating their beliefs for them. Meanwhile, the puppet master couldn't seem to bring themselves to speak. It wasn't often that Mirage went fully nonverbal, but Eerie recognized their mood immediately.
It's all right, dear.
Eerie tried to soothe them.
What's done is done. Everyone is safe and there's nothing left to worry about.
Oh, Eerie, I knew you were stupid, but I didn't realize you were that stupid.
Calen chided.
There is so much to worry about.
As you said, Harlequin spoke up. What's done is done. However, do you really think they'll be so forgiving next time something happens?
Remember what that lady said.
Calen added.
One more screw-up and poof! Say goodbye to your memory.
Mirage had never felt so intimidated by their own puppets before. The trio were hanging in their usual spot on the wall. Their dead eyes stared at the bot, seeming to see right through them. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was sacred. Their mind wasn't their own. All Mirage could do was give a small whimper, reaching back to paw at the peg in the back of their neck anxiously. The voices were getting worse. They were getting louder. They wanted the peg out. They needed to be able to express themselves fully. Everything inside of them felt like it was about to explode. A dramatic gasp from the saddest-looking puppet made Mirage jump in surprise, quickly turning to look at him.
What will happen to us if Mirage's memory gets wiped?
Piero asked.
Will we be gone too?
I can't disappear,
Calen replied.
I'm too beautiful to go away. Though, I suppose if I do, I can take some solace in knowing I've taken Eerie down with me.
That was enough to snap Mirage fully into a panic. What would happen to Eerie if they got in trouble again? Would they take her away? Would she be thrown in the garbage? Would she simply cease to exist anymore? The puppet master shook as they looked between Eerie and Calen.
That won't happen,
Eerie tried to insist.
Everything's going to be all right.
But it'll be a lot better when you die,
Calen said.
Don't you speak to her that way!
Mirage shouted. They grasped Calen, yanking her down so hard that her strings snapped, and her handle clattered down to the ground.
Get your hands off of me,
she demanded.
Why are you like this?
Mirage yelled, shaking the puppet around.
I didn't make you like this!
You did make me like this,
the puppet replied.
You made all of us like this, because you're a sad little freak who doesn't know how to exist without fucking everything up.
Mirage, darling,
Eerie called, trying once more to soothe the other. But it seemed it was too late. Even though the puppet couldn't breathe, Mirage found themselves wrapping their hands around her tiny neck to squeeze. Calen squeaked, and they could hear the wood groaning in protest. Then she laughed. She laughed, and soon the others joined in. Eerie tried to speak, but her words were drowned out by the laughter surrounding Mirage like a velvet blanket smothering them into submission. They wouldn't submit. Not now. Not ever. With a loud scream, they threw Columbina as hard as they could. Her wood shattered against the ground, and in that moment, everything went silent. Yet somehow, the silence was almost as deafening as the laughing had been. Not even Erie spoke. For the longest time, Mirage stood there and stared at what they had done. The puppet lay on the floor in a crumpled heap. Her dress was disheveled, and her parts had scattered and splintered. Mirage? Zavi's voice broke through the silence, flooding Mirage with a strange sense of combined relief and unease. How much had Zavi seen? How much had he heard? They'd been so lost in everything that they hadn't even heard the door open. "Hey, buddy," the taller bot said in a surprisingly soft voice. "What's going on?" Zavi took a step towards the other, only for Mirage to make an unhappy noise and step backward. Rather than pushing it, Zavi held up all his hands to show that he meant no harm. "All right, you don't want me getting closer. It's cool," he said. "Why don't you sit down for a second? You want to talk this all out?" Zavi was kicking himself for not noticing all of Mirage's discomfort sooner. He was a medical bot after all. He'd simply never expected to meet another bot who might need the same help as a human would. He watched Mirage's fingers give a few wiggles, and then they clenched into fists.
Why do you care?
Mirage asked. "Look, maybe you and I got off on the wrong foot," Zavi replied. "Maybe I've been a little bit of an asshole."
Little bit.
"Okay, maybe I've been a straight-up asshole," he corrected himself, fighting off the urge to get annoyed. "And I'm sorry for that." Again, he took a step forward, and again Mirage stepped back. The puppet master reached back under their hood to continue fiddling with the peg. They wanted to remove it. It felt so uncomfortable that it hurt. At least they equated the feeling to human pain. The motion didn't go unnoticed by Zavi. "Is there something up with your neck?" he asked.
They put something in it.
Mirage answered hesitantly.
I can't get it out.
"Do you want me to try?" Zavi offered. Mirage made another unhappy noise, outright backing themselves against the closest wall. "All right, it's okay," Zavi cooed. "Why don't you sit down and hold Erie for a minute?" Mirage might not have had the same system as a person, but they still seemed to be displaying symptoms that were far too familiar to the former medical bot. When he'd come into the room, they had been shaking, disassociating from reality, using their puppets to scold themselves and increase their worry, and they had increased irritability. Mirage was having their own form of a panic attack. The most he could do was be there for them to help them ground themselves. Erie was the puppet master's comfort item. She would be the easiest thing to use to help them. His thoughts were right on the money. Even though Mirage wouldn't allow Zavi near them, the mere suggestion of holding Erie seemed to have them calming down. They hesitated for only a moment before they approached their workbench and pulled her into their arms. Her little head turned to look up at them, and they felt her soothing presence as they played with the fabric of her sleeve. Sitting down with her in their lap was more of a comfort than they were willing to admit out loud. Rather than trying to get any closer, Zavi sat on the floor. He crossed his legs only to find himself accidentally kicking one of Columbina's pieces. The puppet didn't say anything. Neither did Mirage. The taller bot grasped what was left of her torso, watching a hip joint clatter to the ground as he picked her up. "Do you need help fixing her?"
I don't want to fix her.
Mirage admitted, still fiddling with Erie's little arm.
All she does is make fun of me and be mean to Erie.
"You don't have to if you don't want to," Zavi shrugged. "But I think your other friends over there might get lonely without her. Are you going to make them a new friend?"
Maybe.
"A nicer friend?" Mirage didn't respond, and Zavi didn't push them to. He just let Mirage sit there with their thoughts.
She is rather horrible,
Erie said, speaking up again.
but I don't think she deserves to be put in the garbage.
"How would you feel about me taking her?" Zavi asked. Mirage perked up, looking at Zavi with confusion. Their eyes might have been blank and that smile still plastered on their face, but the taller bot could still read it in their expression.
Why?
"Well, then she's not in the trash," he said. "She can stay in my room. Then if you decide you want her back, she's always here for you. If you don't want her anymore, then she'll just live in there." Really, Zavi just wanted to make sure Mirage wasn't making a decision out of anger that they would regret later. No matter what, however, it was all the puppet master's choice. Mirage mulled it over for a while before giving Zavi a nod of agreement. Something in the other seemed to brighten, and the former medical bot felt hopeful that he was helping. Erie had spoken up, and that was a good sign. Panic attacks were never easy, no matter who had them. "How are you feeling?" Zavi asked.
I feel weird.
Mirage admitted. "Why?"
It's weird that you're being nice to me.
They said. Zavi gave a small laugh at that, standing from where he sat. That was a valid feeling to have, considering how they'd been acting towards each other since the day they met. If you want, we can go back to fighting tomorrow, he teased. But I think you earned a day away from it after saving our butts earlier.
But I didn't.
Mirage started, only for Eerie to interrupt them.
Now, none of that. I told you, you helped everyone,
she said softly.
You're too hard on yourself, dear.
Listen to the little wooden lady, Zavi said cheerfully. She's right. The more he watched Mirage interact with the puppet, the less it became creepy and the more it became intriguing. He was shocked at himself for not recognizing her for what she was, a coping mechanism. Eerie was the positive perspective inside of them, whereas Columbina and possibly even the others seemed to be the negatives. The fighting he'd heard earlier was quite literally Mirage self-deprecating and spiraling into depression. That sheer range of emotion had Zavi wondering what he and Fairy Floss were capable of. Mirage was the oldest model of the three of them, and they were capable of far more than he would have expected. You know, I have an idea, he said, grinning brightly at Mirage. You mentioned there was something in your neck, right?
Yeah.
And obviously it makes you uncomfortable.
Very much so.
Eerie spoke up.
It hurts them.
Well, what if I looked at it? Zavi suggested. I'm no technician, but I used to be a nurse. I'm sure I can figure out some way to help.
You were a nurse?
Mirage asked in surprise. They couldn't help but look Zavi up and down. He didn't look like the type to be in the medical field. Then again, the puppet master had no idea what he might have looked like before they'd all been brought to Star Palace. Out of the three of them, Mirage himself had been the one with the least number of changes made. Their outfit had already been close enough to fitting Star Palace's theme. Why bother paying extra money for clothes that weren't needed? The shorter bot's confusion made Zavi's smile falter. They really hadn't spoken all that much to each other, had they? While his lower hands both fiddled with the broken Columbina, he reached to rub an upper hand against his other arm. Yeah, weird, huh? he asked, laughing to try and lighten the mood. Out of the three of us, I'm actually the one who fits here the least. You and Fairy both already had programming in show business. I mean, you did, right? Mirage blinked a few times, tilting their head to the side in a way that originally would have unnerved Zavi. Now he was used to it. He could tell that they were thinking their answer through.
I was,
they replied.
I used to be written out for children's birthday parties. I do puppet shows.
They motioned towards Eerie in their lap. The puppet's neck gave a little click as she turned her gaze from Mirage to Zavi.
We were quite popular at first,
she said.
But then the orders came in less and less until eventually we just sat in the back. Kids found us less amusing and more creepy. Another model became more popular. But it wasn't popular for long,
Mirage continued.
Our company went bankrupt. Kids stopped wanting clowns at their parties.
How many parties did you get to do? Zavi asked.
367,
Eerie replied with a nod.
We did parties 5 days a week for a straight year. Then less and less.
That was far sadder than Zavi was expecting. Then again, he didn't know what he was expecting. Mirage had been a mystery to him. He hadn't want to learn anything about them. Now he regretted not giving them a chance. Thankfully, he had the opportunity to change that. With a newfound resolve, he sauntered forward, making Mirage recoil back as Zavi loomed over them. But the former medical bot didn't harm them. He set Columbina down against the work desk with a grin. Let's take a look at your neck, yeah? See if we can fix it? Mirage glanced down at Eerie, almost as though they were asking her permission. Her little arms moved, though Zavi wasn't sure how, as if to tell them to do it. Only after that did Mirage nod to Zavi in agreement. Their hands shook as they reached to pull down their hood, leaning their head forward so he could see. This was another first. Zavi had never seen Mirage without their hood on before. The problem, thankfully, was easily evident. There was a small wooden peg jammed into the back of their necks so tightly that it was almost splintering. That's what they shoved in there? The taller bot asked in disbelief. It looks like they just used a leftover IKEA furniture peg. In fact, the more he looked at it, the surer he was that that was exactly what it was. The only thing that stood between Mirage and comfort was a silly little wooden piece someone had just found laying around after they'd put together all the furniture in the maintenance room office. Zavi squinted at it, moving Mirage's hair out of the way so he could take a closer look. Can I use your pliers and, something that can squeeze in here? He asked. There were so many tools on the puppet master's workbench. Finding the right pliers was easy, but he wasn't sure if the other even had something that would fit in there. Before he could speak his thoughts, he found Mirage holding up a knife. Where did you get that? He gasped.
It's my wit and a knife,
Mirage responded.
Can't make a puppet without carving the wood.
Well, that made sense. Xavi had to give them that. With a shrug, he took the knife and the pliers, getting straight to work. The piece of wood was stubborn. More than once, the knife he'd wedged in between the pieces of Mirage's neck and head shot out violently. If he'd been human, he would have cut his fingers to the bone. Thankfully, he wasn't. Even if the knife wasn't unwedging the peg entirely, it was helping him chip away at it bit by bit. He managed to wiggle it with the pliers, starting to scrape at it with the knife before trying to yank on it again. "Almost got it," he muttered, wiggling it around forcefully. Mirage held Eerie tightly, using their other hand to grip their workbench so hard that they could feel the wood starting to crack in their grasp. What Xavi was doing was uncomfortable, but not being able to operate as they were intended was worse. As a result, they were willing to fight through it. The original discomfort had been getting so bad that it was making it hard to function at all. It was overwhelming and made them feel far too overstimulated. They could feel it there always, and they wanted it gone. And then suddenly, it was. Xavi let out a shout of triumph as the peg was freed from its prison. It flew across the room, landing on the floor with a few click-clacks, and rolled off into the darkness. At this point, it didn't really matter where it went. The taller bot did a little dance, pumping the fist holding the knife up and down. "Am I great or what?" he asked, tossing it into the air and catching it with ease. "Does that feel better, Mirage?" What on earth was that clicking? It was a noise Xavi hadn't ever heard from the other bot before. Mirage's entire body shuddered and twitched around in an unnatural way. It was like the Puppet Master's programming was learning to function all over again. Then their head began to spin. The tools clattered to the floor as Xavi backed away from the other. "Mirage?" he said breathlessly. They didn't answer. They only sat there as their heads spun and spun. Just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Their head fell back, their shoulders giving a few more shakes as their bodies slumped. Seconds felt like hours, and for the longest time, Xavi wasn't sure what to do. Had he broken something? He fought the urge to stay where he was and slowly made his way back to the other side. "Mirage? Buddy? You are starting to freak me out over here. You good?" Xavi asked as he leaned sideways to try and look at the other. The Puppet Master snapped up straight, making Xavi yelp in fright and dance step away again. That wasn't Mirage's face. At least that wasn't the face he was used to. Where their permanent smile used to be was now an unhappy grimace.
"You did it.
Mirage said, their voice soft at first.
You did it."
They grasped their own head, feeling over the new features on their face as manic laughter escaped them. They were finally free. They were finally themselves again. However, the more they laughed, the more Xavi wasn't so sure he'd made the right decision. Hopefully their mood evened out over time. This was probably just a celebratory burst of energy, right? Like someone getting to unmask for the first time? That had to be what it was. "Geez, no wonder they went out of their way to turn this setting off," he muttered to himself. It was like the shorter bot's moods were backwards. The happy face seemed unhappy, and the sad face seemed psychotically excited. "Hey, are you okay?" he managed to ask, louder this time.
"Okay.
Mirage asked, standing from their seat.
Okay. I feel great. Better than ever. Spectacularly superb."
They held Eerie up in the air, spinning in giddy circles and dancing on their toes.
"Look at you, dear.
Eerie chimed happily.
It's been so long since I've seen that beautiful face. I've missed it so."
Xavi laughed nervously, watching the two of them as he sidestepped back to the work desk. On one hand, it was good to see the Puppet Master finally happy. On the other hand, he was going to need a while to adjust to what almost felt like a new personality radiating out of the other. "Well," he started, making a noise as if clearing his throat. "Looks like you two have some celebrating to do, so why don't I just take your little friend here and head back to check on Shura?" His fingers had only just touched Columbina's body when the other bot's gaze snapped at him. Immediately, he felt the need to retract his hand.
"Leave her,"
they said, pulling Eerie back to their chest.
"She and I need to have a little talk."
Xavi tried to smile, but it only managed to look like a nervous grimace. Yep, you got it, buddy." He chuckled out, giving them a set of anxious finger guns. "You two enjoy your little party for two. I'm just gonna go. You just let me know if you need anything else, okay?" The more he spoke, the more he found himself jogging over to the door. Xavi had no idea if what he'd done was the right thing to do or not. He'd wanted to help Mirage, but now he was worried that he'd just freed some sort of problematic setting. Only time would tell. For now, he was going to let himself worry about Shura and Shura alone. At least, he was going to try. Mirage just needed time to emotionally explore their newfound freedom. Everything was going to be okay. He hoped.